gentle dudes, I hate to interrupt, but it is 4 o'clock, and
Yes.
we are. Thank you for entertaining this pre-session Q&A. We will have another Q&A.
And he's
here.
here.
He's here. Yeah. Elvis.
I love your hat so much.
Thanks. I like your hat too.
Thank you. All right. On time, ready to rock. Let's go.
Yeah, here we are.
You made it, and that's what matters.
Welcome.
Parking Fest 2025. All right, I guess we have to start the actual show now.
Yeah.
So, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you can hear, I'm losing my voice a little bit. It's fine. We're cool. Welcome to... Oh, we don't have the cool font. That's the one problem with doing it on Della's laptop. Oh, no. Oh, well, it's fine.
That's a cool font.
It's pretty cool.
That's a cool font.
Mine was cooler, though. It is a... Here be Dragons.
not
We're
Comic Sans.
building at the edge of the map. We'll be talking in very broad strokes about a lot of things. So much more to this, really, than you can fit into just an hour. But we are going to be doing our best to offer our own, sometimes conflicting advice on the topic. And we're also going to be doing our best to literally build a world from scratch right here in the span of about 60 minutes. So we're going to be moving right along. Very, very first question, probably asking, who the fuck are we? Will, you usually are pretty good at taking this one away.
Jesus Christ.
No pressure.
Hi. Hello. My name is Will. I just got here. We're live from the Apocalypse. We're a not-for-profit TTRPG studio that makes actual play content like streams and podcasts and things like that to raise money for nonprofits and aid organizations and other important causes. We stream on Twitch. We make some podcasts. And we do sometimes panels at conventions, if you can believe it.
Yeah. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Will. I just got here. I think I said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brendan. I also just got here a little bit ago.
Hi, I'm Della. I've been here the whole time.
You stole it from me. I'm Andrew. Remarks complete.
Moving right along. So, it's just an entire world. How hard could it be? Like, watch. We will do it right now. So, this is a map that Will helpfully generated randomly. Was it random in Incarnate? Mm-hmm. Or you just sort of like scribble around with the tools? Yeah, just sort of scribbled around with the tools. We did establish the ground rules up front. We're going to keep it a fantasy setting, just to kind of lock things in a little bit. So we're not doing sci-fi or anything like that. But we're going to be doing our best to apply our different approaches to try and fill this in from literally just a map that could be anything. I saw this map for the first time last night when I dropped it into the PowerPoint presentation.
This is the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of an unfair head start in that I was able to stare at it for a long, long time, and I had to stop myself from staring at it because I was getting too over my skis with stuff that I was thinking about from looking at it. Which, I guess, is a solid enough segue into, I guess, my first section here, which is sort of like inspiration, experience, and conflict. We'll be kind of moving back and forth between like what I think is a couple of layers of world building here. Many of my esteemed colleagues here are much more so of the Chaos Goblin school of world building. And while I do like many elements of that, I like to think of myself as something of the structure kobold in the group. So I am going to be kind of playing a little bit of devil's advocate and making an argument for over-preparation and overthinking it, just for those people in the audience for whom that might be a little bit more their speed. If they like getting really into the weeds with things, the way that I sometimes do. So, in terms of, pardon me, inspiration, one thing that I am a big fan of when you're trying to build a world and you're thinking about the genre that you are working in is to counterintuitively read everything except for that genre. and tropes and cliches are very helpful. They are easy shorthands for people for like understanding entry points into your world. But I personally tend to find a much deeper well of inspiration when I am looking at something that is outside of that context. Like, for instance, we're talking about a fantasy world. I personally am, for as much D&D and such as I run, I am criminally underread in terms of fantasy fiction. I just don't read a lot of it. I've never read a single Brandon Sanderson book.
Sorry, what?
Know.
You're not missing much.
All right, everybody calm down. Everybody
Whoa!
I haven't
Fight
read,
me. Meet me behind the Waffle House parking lot.
I haven't read Patrick
I'll see you there at
Rothfuss
3 a.m.
either. So,
You're a monster.
but what I do read a lot of, because I'm an absolute turbo dork, is a lot of very dry political science and history. Because I, like many people in the DC area, once upon a time fancied myself as a think tank policy wonk whom everyone would call a very, very smart boy. Look how far I've come. But as a consolation prize, I get to pull a lot of this very interesting information into my fantasy stories. So, one thing I like to think of is that geography informs a lot, except when it doesn't. So, very importantly, I have here a sort of a geographic, went out of my brain. Topographical map of North America. I also have a map here of the 1916 treaty lines that divvied up the Middle East after World War I. We love these nice, neat, straight lines that I'm sure we can all agree have worked out great for everybody and have caused no problems. You can tell they caused no problems because they're so nice and neat. Mm-hmm. Geography informs so much about a culture and a place and the kinds of things that are going to be happening there. While at the same time, humans are messy bitches, and we decided to make coloring books a competition sport. What does this nice, neat, straight line cut through the middle of? Don't know, don't care. What is important is that my part of the map that I get to color in with my favorite crayon is a little bit bigger than it was before. But if we're going to assume that geography matters, and I'm trying to keep myself on the clock because I could literally be doing this forever. So I was looking at this map, and there's just a few things that just looking at the geography of it just jump out at me. One is you can see down in the southeastern corner of the map, there's a little island down there where there's a little volcano. It's a little volcano guy with, the baking soda and the vinegar. That to me tells me that there is active volcanism in the region, because I grew up the child of a neurodivergent geologist who explained tectonic drift as a way of showing affection.
Okay.
There is also a city there on this volcanic island. Interesting choice. Why do I say it's interesting? Because if you look at the places on the map where there are cities placed, there are none in the interior. None. Why? People decided that they would rather build a city in the shadow of an active volcano than build anywhere in the interior of this continent. Why?
That's ominous.
There's all kinds of answers. Like there's all kinds of things that could be. Everyone here is raising their hand and they've got an answer. And all those answers are correct because that is nothing but plot hooks right there. Just looking at that one little detail. In turn, because there is this active volcanism, if you look on the far other end of the map, up there in the frigid north, there is a little city next to a big lake there. Given that we seemed to indicate active volcanism around the edge of the tectonic plates, I think it's not unreasonable to think that maybe that lake that it is on is maybe geothermally heated. That probably is why that particular city is there. It is an uncommonly warm area of the map up there. Two other important details that leaped out to me that probably inform a lot about this is that looking at the map, it's very bumpy. It's a very bumpy map. There's a lot of mountains. There's a lot of hills. There's not a lot of what would appear to be arable farmland. Only the city down here in the southwest appears like it has a lot of convenient access to easily cultivatable farmland, which broadly could suggest, doesn't have to, but it could suggest that food is not something that on this continent, in this setting, is taken for granted. That maybe food is something that is very important because it's not necessarily guaranteed. It has to be hard fought out of difficult terrain. It has to be traded for. It has to be paid for. And for this reason, maybe there are a lot of cultural folkways around food and eating and the protection of those things and the importance of that. Another thing is down here in the little desert section, down here in the southeast, there is a city next to what appears to be sort of a large kind of pit-like formation. Now that could be any number of things, but what I immediately thought of, given the fact that it's sort of this peninsula sticking out into a sea and its general placement latitudinally, that's not a term. I'm going to pretend it's a term. I immediately think of an open pit salt mine, logically. Which salt is an extremely important resource in the pre-industrial world. It is essential to food preservation. It is an essential source of sodium, of electrolytes that prior to the industrial era had to be extracted manually in extremely grueling conditions. It has, for many, many, many centuries, traditionally been done by enslaved and or imprisoned people, which tells us if that salt mine is large enough that it is represented on the map, that probably tells us something about the economy of that region. Now, we could go in that direction, or there is also another way we go, since we are talking about a fantasy setting that has magic in it. Mm-hmm. This is a very dry, very salty area. Part of the reason why this work is so grueling is because as you are sweating in these hot, grueling conditions, the thing that you are extracting out of the ground is literally mummifying you as it does it. And in a fantasy setting, mummies can still mine. So is this a society that is built around necromancy, where they have the undead doing their salt mining for them? Is this a form of debt peonage, where people essentially are mortgaging their corpses in order to be able to survive in this society? In which case, somebody's got to unionize these motherfucking mummies, is what I'm saying. So these are just a few different things that you can do, just going off of like inspiration from the real world. How you determine those, which ones you want to go with, is getting into the experience part of it. Designing for the experience that you want. What kind of story do you want to tell? What kind of gameplay do you want your players to have and that you want to run for them? And sometimes there is also running for the experience that you want, and there's also sometimes designing for the experience that you have. A personal anecdote of mine is a game that I was running. It was a reasonably large LARP game, where we had initially envisioned the game being much larger than it was. We had designed this large, sprawling, epic kind of setting, anticipating a player base that was on the order of like 100 people regularly. We ended up with maybe about 30 on the regular, which is still a respectably sized game to run for, but it felt like this kind of small town game that we had was kind of drowning in this sprawling, massive empire that we had written. And eventually we kind of had to come to the conclusion that we needed to make some changes in order to make these stakes more immediate to the people that were playing in the game. There was a vision mismatch between what we wanted and what we had, which then in turn gets into the conflict section of determining where the conflict is in your world, because that is going to be where the story comes from. If everything's humming along, great. If everything is hokey-dory and all the systems work perfectly, then what is happening? What actually occurs that your players are going to actually be doing? I am certainly guilty of doing this sometimes, and I know other people are as well, of you get so into the weeds of designing these intricate systems of how this setting works that you fail to realize that you have left nothing for your players to do. And we're going to talk a little bit later about specifically building in points of access for your players. And the last note I'm going to have on this, I promise, in terms of conflict, is that conflict is also inexorably tied up in your antagonist in the setting. Antagonist or antagonists, plural. Because generally speaking, antagonists are sources of conflict. And conflict is usually going to arise either because they are a representative of the status quo that is trying to keep the status quo where it is, or they are trying to disrupt the status quo. And thinking about where your villain fits into that, how your villain relates to the world, is just as important as figuring out where your players relate to the world. There's another anecdote I could tell about that, but I am already over my time and we need to keep moving.
Yes, good. So, as I said earlier, I'm Andrew, right? So when you start breaking down the world and you're looking at that conflict piece and you're trying to figure out how to weave your villain or villains into the overall narrative and in the overall conflicts of the world itself, right? This is where my favorite thing is, which is creating those plot threads, right? And it's the intersection of what the players bring as their characters and say, here's my origin, my backstory, my family, my problems, my whatever they have going on, right? Hearing all that and saying, that's kind of neat. Let me look at this new fantasy land that we're working in, where I'm asking questions like, what's in the inland areas that people are scared of, right? If food is scarce, who's controlling it and how and why, right? What are the different pieces of those factions, right? Who's ultimately in charge and how does it tier down to captains and lieutenants and like the angry and abusive, potentially sheriff that's in that one town that reports back to the High Lord somewhere, but maybe he's the first villain of many that have to fight through, right? Something like that. And then I started saying to myself, great, how do I connect the players' backstories to the villains? And not in a sense that like they know the villains personally, but there are bubbles of support, logistics, and other types of just day-to-day activities that the villains have going on where those characters could be adjacent to representatives of those villains, right? One of my favorite things, this has come up in one of the games I've run. One of the villains, they are fine. This is a Brendan Lee Mulligan term, but same thing, patrons of the arts, right? If you've seen that campaign. We have villains that are like, hey, we love going to the theater. Cool. One of the characters works at the theater. Right? There's no connection to him or why they know these villains or like whether or not they're actually bad guys to him, but that initial relationship means they're in the same community and then they can start leveraging friends and different types of like employees and all those other different touch points to be pulled closer into the plot. And as things happen in this world, as food becomes more scarce, as salt, if you've ever played triangle strategy, is found to be like, a new component for arcane power, right? And you go, oh, wow. Now we have to ask, okay, how does that ripple through what the villains do, and how do the players see that impact, and how does it affect the world at large as they move? The model I like to use for this is a doomsday clock. Has anybody ever played Urban Shadows? Couple? Okay, cool. Great system, right? It's powered by the apocalypse. You can find their PDFs online, usually for free. In the back of the book, there's a doomsday clock. And all it is just basically like the 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, and 12 positions. And you write it out so, hey, I'm a villain. My plan is ultimate world domination. That's 12. Cool. Let's wind the clock back. What are the steps I'm doing to get there, right? Because I can't just show up day one and win. right? I got to get the MacGuffin, and I got to raise the army, and I got to make the demon deal, and I got to double cross the whatever, this whole thing, right? So you plot that out based on your social political conflicts and say, okay, this is what the villain's doing, and then reflect it in the story so that those tie-ins, the players start to see it. And they start to see how the world changes or evolves as the villain gets closer to their success. And hopefully they'll start asking questions, because those become plot hooks. Why did this change? Why is it suddenly like the rations have changed? Or why is this area of town suddenly blocked off and nobody's talking about it? Hey, why did these important people just go missing and everyone's acting like it's normal, right? Something to cue interest and curiosity and drive them in that direction. And on the flip side, when the players actively confront the villains and they say, hey, you have a nefarious plot, you're at number 6 or 12 to get your MacGuffin, and the players managed to steal that MacGuffin from the big bad. And now they're mad, right? Because they're like, oh, this is key to my world domination plot, and I no longer have it. The silly bard has it and doesn't know what it is. And that's always a problem, right? That villain's not going to quit. They're going to go, cool, what's my new plan, right? How am I sending assassins after them? How am I going to kidnap their families? What am I going to do to box them into a corner to maybe make a deal with them or get someone to double cross, right? That comes from that doomsday clock model. And so it all integrates from the world building piece of what's going on in the world. Now you've established your actual conflicts in the region and seeing how it slowly tears out to what villains are doing, and villains are doing, and then how the PCs, without a direct shove in that direction, start to see change in their world and ask questions, because the change is usually not for the better in those moments. Okay? In a nutshell, I think that covers it.
Mm-hmm. Right, optimistic villains who look on the bright side of failure.
So, but
And if I could jump in real quick. Okay. No, if I could jump in real quick, I would also say this kind of ties back into some stuff we'll talk about at the end, but you can make a villain infinitely more interesting just by adding like one little detail, and it doesn't have to be from a plot or a backstory. It could be from the setting. Like you could have regular sheriff ACAP, right? Or you could have volcano sheriff, volcano ACAP.
Or
I like that.
liquid sheriff.
Liquid Sheriff,
Exactly.
Liquid Snake, yes.
Exactly like Snake in Metal Gear.
So the reason my face was doing a lot there is that I'm in the campaign he was describing. This is I'm about to have some experiences. So we're now going to talk about sketches. What do you sketch? What do you detail? Designing for player access, and specifically not just designing for access, but designing for player buy-in. Now we want to design for player buy-in from jump. We want to design for player buy-in immediately. The way we do that is first we just define our immutables. Our immutables are things that are going to be our map. They're going to be the setting that we, the GM, have decided this is what the world is going to look like in broad strokes. And then we have our mutables, all the things that our players can add in their flavor with. And our players can affect a lot. One of the ways I like to do this is through a method that I call facts and rumors. And I go around the table and I ask my players for facts and rumors about everything in this world. So let's do some audience participation.
Ooh, my favorite
Who
part.
would like to give me a fact about the salt mines? You.
I'm going to go with the mummies. I think they are controlled by there's a small group up at top who controls all of the necromancers who control all of the mummies. That's how there can be such a large salt mine with such little resources.
Heck yeah.
Fantastic.
Optimistic necromancers controlling the
Optimistic
mummy.
nep-
We like this.
I think
We love that.
That makes a lot of sense because you have like necromancers at the top, and then the magic trickles down
Yeah.
to
yeah.
the mummies who,
Yeah.
who are working in the mines.
Every time.
Okay, we've got Reaganomic necromancy.
Ray Ogden.
The Necro-Reaganomicon.
Exploitation of
hated that.
exploitation of
I
the
didn't feel good.
That's
Yeah,
a,
I mean,
that's a
I
great
could do one
MacGuffin.
better. Exploitation of the necroletariat.
I'm kicking you off the panel.
I'm so proud of that.
Okay, who would like to give me, that was our fact about the salt mines. We got a small group of necromancers controlling the mummies. Who wants to give me a rumor about the mummies? I'm gonna go all the way in the back. You with the nose. Yeah, the glove in the nose. Ooh,
All right.
The salt is not a food product, but alchemy. Amazing. So now we know our world has alchemists. Even if, as GMs, we did not think there was going to be alchemy in this world, now we know alchemy exists, and whether or not it's real, people believe in it. Okay. Who would like to give me a fact about trade routes bringing food into that barren city? Sir. So all the food is brought in by boat. All the food is brought in by sea. So seaports, extremely valuable. We need warm water ports. I can't finish that sentence. I apologize.
I think, because crucially, that also implies that there is opportunity to be had by someone who is enterprising or suicidal enough to try to bring goods overland through the area that nobody dares settle.
This is
And
actually a foreshadowing for
people-
the rest of the presentation.
How do the people in control of those trade routes feel about those things, and what are they going to do when those conflicts arise?
These are all questions
Right.
we can now be asking ourselves as GMs by this amazing fact we've been given. Somebody give me a rumor about what's happening, what used to happen in these overland trails. In the back right there.
Real quick, I just want to point out that y'all are a lot more willing to give rumors than facts, which tells me that you are liars.
You got to get the
Rumors are
tea.
great because rumors are just facts that people like hear about and trickle through and get fun things.
Schrodinger's
with
facts, if
with
you
the,
will.
The pink gloves. I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat. Ooh,
Nobody
nobody
survives.
knows what happens at night in the desert because nobody survives a sundown.
That's good.
Incredible. Incredible. So now we have some interesting things like what's going on in this desert region. Now, I would love someone to give me a fact about the nearest sister city to our salt mine. It's run by angels.
Okay.
Hell yeah. Now you're talking.
Volcano angels?
That's my shit. Volcano angels. I'm running this game now, so this is going to be a one-shot. We'll have it up on LFTA. Thank you all very much. I'm stealing your ideas right now.
You're all playing in it.
You're all playing in it.
You're designing our next campaign. Thank you.
That's incredible. I love it. So we're going to call that the Volcano City. So what does angels mean? Now, as GMs, now we get to sort of decide what that means. Our player has given us this amazing tidbit. Are these actual angels? Are these divinities? Or are these people pretending to be divinities? We get to decide.
Are they old ones?
Are they, thank you, Cthulhu friend.
That's always
Everyone needs a Cthulhu friend.
Everybody needs a Cthulhu friend,
got
and
that
he's
one
ours.
friend.
Yeah, it's just all about the old ones.
If you look around a room and you don't see the Cthulhu friends,
You're the Cthulhu friend.
Open the gate.
Who would like to give me a rumor about this city? I saw with the book. The angels are the souls of the mummies. That is sick as shit, and I love it. So now we actually have some information about what our world believes about the afterlife. And if I can get into a thing that is both very weird theology, is something that Brendan and I are basically, that's our shit entirely. So that allows us to bring in some interesting stuff about spirituality in the afterlife. Is there a real afterlife? Or do people know about a real afterlife? Does resurrection happen? Or is it only for God's most special boy?
And
We don't know. And is that most special boy going to be one of your players who's going to cause a problem later?
going back briefly
knows?
to the discussion of divinity that was asked before the session properly started, is important to get to some of those facts down up front, or at least somewhat known, because in a fantasy setting where things like gods and supernatural agents are active in the world, and certain things that out here in the real world we take as articles of faith, things that you must to a certain degree believe in the absence of empirical proof, you don't have that same conflict in a fantasy setting, because you can have genuine empirical proof that these things are true and factual, and that is going to have a profound impact on how people believe things and have faith in your world.
I'll go ahead and throw in a counter argument with that and say QAnon and COVID truthers. People refuse to believe in things that are true all the time. You can absolutely make that a central conflict in your world, even though there's proof. People are dumb, y'all.
You made it sad, Della.
I'm sorry. I do that.
Here's another piece.
I have a whole section of this presentation.
Fair enough.
So when we're so as you can all see from this sort of section, this is something that players get excited about. People want to have their cool idea be part of the story. Go around your table. Ask your players what they want to see. This is a way for them to impact your world. This is also why, as Brendan was saying, it is important to have your mutables and immutables in place. If this is a world where angels do not exist and the gods do not play dice with the fates of man, then we can't have necessarily angels or the souls of mummies being those angels. But I gotta be honest, that's such a sick concept that I, as the GM, would probably alter my plans to incorporate that. The other option, if you would move us ahead one, another way to engage player access, yeah, you can't see that. I threw this in here. So this is a session 0 option that was developed by Sasha Stronach, a Maori author, who you can find on Blue Sky at the Understatesman. She is an extremely cool person, and this is her sort of like city building model. So we start with the monolith. There's a object in the center of town, and you start there. You define your object, and then you move down. You have the streets. What's going on in the streets? You have the buildings. What do they look like? The organizations, the city itself, and then you, the players. You can find this. She's got this posted for free on her Blue Sky. I encourage you to look it up. Very cool people. So there are a lot of different ways that you can bring in your players into your session 0 and have them really get engaged in your world. These are not the only tools. I would encourage you to use Facts and Rumors because I think it's the best, because it's mine. But Sasha's method, also extremely cool. Also, you should read her book. It's called The Dawn Hounds. It's amazing. And that's my pitch, and I believe that's all I have to say.
Oh, you're ahead of schedule.
Oh, shit.
There's another model of that where you establish what's going on in the streets, and then you establish what's going on in the sheets. I have to talk now. All right, so if we could actually hop back to the map for a second. All the way back. There we go. So, as Brendan pointed out, when you look at this map, what strikes you? The cities are coastal, they're very far away. There's a lot of land in between everything here. And yeah, there are seaports. That's probably your main route of trade. But when you are running a game in a setting like this, and your players say, we need to get back to this city on the other side to warn them about something, and you say, okay, that's going to take you a week, they're inevitably going to ask you one very specific question. And if we could hop back ahead. What if we just built an airship? What if we just invented flight? That would make this a lot easier. Now, you could say no, you could say that doesn't exist, or this presents an interesting opportunity for you to sit back and say, interesting, what does that look like? When you say airship, does it have an engine? What powers that engine? Is it magic? Is it science? What's the deal here? And the more questions you ask about it, because this is something that they wanted, and you are not immediately saying no, you are not immediately shutting them down, they're going to get very excited about it. And they're going to give you a lot of information, and there's going to be a lot of buy-in, and there's probably going to be a lot of disbelief of like, wait, really?
This is how I get my children to go to a restaurant, by the way.
TTRPG players are children. That is what we're saying here. Do you have a question?
I'd like to add a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody here has listened to the Amazing podcast, not another D&D podcast, but on the topic of airships, when they get an airship, the way that Murph describes the airship's power, he describes it as a fireball spell. So using like the world's mechanics to power, like your game system mechanics, rather than just like, it's a steam.
Yeah,
It's powered by a steam element.
absolutely.
I'm obsessed with that.
I ran a setting, this is kind of my tangent, but I ran a setting where there were combustion engines basically, and they were powered by trapped elementals. And not only were they powered by trapped elementals, but people would take that elemental energy and then they would huff it as a drug. And it would make them go crazy, and it would give them elemental powers. So there are just like layers that you can build in. Anytime you introduce a new element, what are the ramifications of that element? The airship is also a stand-in because there are going to be lots of opportunities when you're running a game where your players are going to ask you if they can do something as a joke. Like they're going to think that they're just like pitching you something completely out of left field that you're never going to say no to. Can we build a car? Can we build something anachronistic? And again, you can say no. There are times where I've said like, that's not really the tone. What if we did this instead? But if you are not married to your idea, if you're not married to your tone, just saying yes and being like, what does that look like? Asking follow-up questions gets you really, really far and earns you a lot of grace.
Giving that pedantic English teacher answer, I don't know. Can you?
Right, exactly, yes. I mean, I know the answer, but why don't you tell me the answer? So knowing when to stop and making shit up on the fly, that is what this section is all about. Is there a slide after this? Or is that...
I think we're just going.
Okay, cool. That's fine then. Don't move it. Don't move it. Awesome. We could have just gone forward instead of going back. Look at us.
Yeah.
Silly geese. So making shit up on the fly. When you can obsessively plan for everything, and respectfully to disagree with Brendan about setting rules for your world, for your cosmology, things like that. Here's an interesting thought. Don't do any of that. And see what happens. Just for fun. If you're just sitting around the table playing with your friends, what's the harm? You might have to pause the session. You might have to like ask follow-up questions. You might have to work through the answers together.
So what is your character feeling right now?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great question.
And yeah, so you are making shit up on the fly, but you're also not making shit up on the fly, right? Because you are stopping and you are giving it due consideration and you are treating it like a real thing in your setting that just got brought up. Another thing that I feel very strongly about, I don't really like running D&D. And I know that is the like ubiquitous system. A lot of people are really into it, and it has its place. I don't hate it. I run it occasionally. I'm running a couple games of it right now. But one thing that I find really behooves you when you are making shit up on the fly is that there are so many stat blocks out there. When it comes to like enemies and interesting NPCs and characters, there are so many stat blocks out there. Most of them are official, some of them are homebrew. And if you Google blank 5e D&D, you will probably get something that you can adapt quickly on the fly as a jumping off point. People say that it's hard to improv with D&D, and that is kind of true because it is a very static system. It is a system that is built on very fixed rules, but there are always interesting opportunities to kind of tweak things. One example of this that I can give is that in a campaign that I was running recently, the players came across an assassin. And I was looking at the assassin 5e, the default stat block, and it's fine. There's like hit points, there's their weapon, there's their damage, and they do a bunch of poison damage. And I was like, that's interesting, because maybe they just coat their weapons in poison. Or maybe this particular sect of assassins takes drugs that replace their blood with poison. And that's where their poison comes from. So before they strike with a weapon, they have to harm themselves, coat the weapon in their own blood, and that's where the poison comes from. And that came up later when one of the players who's a druid, wild-shaped, and bit the assassin. And I was like, cool, yeah, you take all of this poison damage because their blood is poison. And it became this whole, they had a bunch of follow-up questions about it in the setting. One of the players DM'd me after the session and said, if my character dies, I'm playing one of those assassins. And it's stuff like that. The default knight stat block has a brave feature where they get a bonus to saving throws against fear effects. And maybe that knight is brave, or maybe that knight is super drunk all of the time. And that's why they're not afraid of anything, because they are too drunk to know better. And immediately, that is an NPC who is not a cookie-cutter knight. That is a knight with some personality, with a factor that is going to make the players go, what? Why? That seems like a bad idea. So I just we talk about improv a lot. We talk about teacher RPGs in the context of improv a lot. Brennan Lee Mulligan, Dementia 20, Critical Role, all of the above. So it is a yes and, but it's not just a yes and blanket. It's not a yes and let me describe the airship for you. Although if I recall correctly, that description of the airship was sick. But it's yes and what does that look like? Yes, and what's your idea for that airship? And how does that factor into overland trade in our setting? How does that factor into the salt mummies? And so on and so forth.
If I may, one of my favorite yes and questions is, yes, and what are you willing to trade and or give up for that? Because that will get you some very interesting answers.
People are willing to give up way more than you think.
Your player, this is something that I did not talk about in my section, but is important in world building. Your players want to hurt themselves. I don't know if you guys went to, on Thursday, our very good friend Amber was on a panel called about opting into personal suffering in gaming.
Dang.
And your players will opt into suffering. Let them do it. Ask them that question. You will be shocked at the free plot they hand you.
Yeah, you think like, oh, I'll deal you like 3d10 damage. They're like, I'll give up my ability to use magic forever. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's much better. Like, we can definitely turn that into a plot line.
I think I was going to say, as far as and the knowing when to stop and making things up on the fly. So I earlier was talking a lot about being very into like the cited and indexed setting that you write beforehand. I also am a professional DM, and I run a lot of one-shots for groups whom I have never met before. I can't reasonably drop a 100-page primer on the setting in front of these groups whom I have never met before. So frequently what I will do is, sort of like Della was saying, have a couple of like bullet points right up front, like the basic gist of where we are and what we are doing. And I will put it to the players, like, what do you think is true about this world in this moment that you want to try to use to help your particular action that you are trying to do? And, I'll have them roll for it. And if they succeed, great. Like, the group all kind of agrees, yeah, we think that that's true about this world and that has helped them out. And if they fail, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were wrong about that being true in the world, but it wasn't necessarily going to help them in that moment in the way that they thought that it would. And that also gives your players buy-in. And in terms of knowing when to stop, as much as we all love putting together these very intricate and elaborate Lego sets, eventually your players have to play in them. And they're going to play with your toys, and they're going to play with your toys sometimes in ways that you did not think they were going to play with your toys. And my advice is, don't be the fun police. Don't let your players play the game. Let them have agency. Let them interpret your setting in ways that maybe you didn't intend, because it's not just for you. If you want it to just be for you, write a book. Don't play a collaborative game.
This gets very into when to stop making stuff up and actually play and starting to play. Wow, words. Talking earlier about divinity, right? Do you need a divine or magic system in your game? Well, once you've built all that out and you have your players buy in as to what you're doing, that's going to help you prioritize. And you can say, maybe I write something down in case it comes up. Maybe I need to build a whole elaborate thing because it's crucial to the plot. Maybe I don't need it unless somebody trips onto it and it comes up later, right? That kind of helps you figure out where you need to focus your efforts on what to develop.
All right, so we...
To recap.
Yeah, so to recap, so we have fleshed out a section of this setting, and we're probably going to add a few more bits here, maybe with some Q&A and stuff like that.
Oh,
but we haven't fleshed out the entirety of it, but also, you don't have to. There's going to be a lot of sections that your players are never going to touch, and, you know, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Like, if not for your players, then for whom? So, I'm also a big fan of the axiom Schrodinger's gun. It isn't whatever it needs to be until suddenly it needs to be that.
We should probably name this.
Oh yeah,
This
names.
continent.
I did. It does have a name, actually. I called it Reverse Ohio.
Reverse Ohio? See, I thought I was going to trip you up on that. It's like, I've got 5,000 pages of lore on this. What's its name? Oh, the name.
It's
Right.
Reverse Ohio.
Reverse
That's a good
Ohio.
one. That's a very good one.
So we've got the Desert's Haunted. Desert's Haunted.
Yeah.
That's a fact. Angels on the volcano. Mummies in the salt mine. They're connected, probably.
Maybe people think.
Maybe. People think. There's a lot of boat trade. There's a couple cities.
Night is bad.
Night is bad and full of terrors. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And every other detail, you just pull for your players' backstories. Your players will, again, give you all of that stuff. And if you want more details specifically about the city, again, use Sasha's city building. Use the monolith. It's good.
You can build as you go.
Build as you go.
Yeah, the facts and rumors don't have to be at the session 0. You can just walk into a new city and say, hey, what facts and rumors do you know about this place? And if you're looking to just kind of key them in, that'll help develop it immediately. Oh, you've been here before? Great. What do you know about the city? Boom. You start building immediately.
Yep.
All right.
So I think, are we ready for some ending Q&A?
I think so. You're right there. Yes.
Yes.
I have a question about your section about antagonists. Does the antagonist have to be a character? Can the systems in your world inherently be an antagonist?
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
So
Perhaps like flawed economic systems.
Maybe. Yes, they can be systems. You will eventually need people to represent those systems that will be interacting with them, but those conflicts don't need to be kill the people involved. The conflict can be people versus environment, and the environment is the system. You can also run a game that is just people versus environment. You can run a game where they're just mariners shipwrecked trying to survive and get off their island. You don't have to have your antagonist be a person.
So then could I ask one follow-up question to that? How, killing the bad guy is usually a pretty satisfying ending.
Yes.
So when an
Love violence.
antagonist is not a physical person, how do you plan around endgame satisfaction?
Let them kill the ocean.
Yes. First, you must kill the moon.
there's a big moment where if you're going to go that route and say, hey, I want to have an endgame satisfaction where there's no ultimate villain fight, the question then becomes, what is it the players are trying to change about the world, and how do they inspire other people in that same system, right, to then domino that effect? So they have to do some type of either one great act or multiple little acts that leads to the eventual shift of a whole mentality of a system to then bring that to a solid conclusion. It just has to be tangible, kind of big, and something you can like definitely wrap an endgame narrative on. Does that make sense?
Certain
Or kill the
systems, certain systems are going to be better for this than others. Sorry, Brendan. D&D, not necessarily a great system for this. Thirsty Sword Lesbians,
Great
system for this. Specifically, has non-violent change options in each playbook. So if you're interested in having that as a thing, I would recommend checking out that system.
Urban Shadows has a good favors and debt mechanic. So you can make deals and kind of like make contracts instead of having to fight each other out. There's a lot of ways you can work around that. Just make sure the weight of it is make sure there's enough weight on it to make it have good narrative impact and show the change of those decisions on the broader society around them, or it won't feel like a satisfying moment of victory.
And I think it has a little bit to do with the kind of catharsis that you want your end game to have. Because you can definitely have that ending where you've won the battle but not the war, and your only option is to sort of persevere, is to have hope, keep the faith, and persevere in the face of adversity, and take what small victory you have for what it is. But also, sometimes, and a lot of tabletop RPGs are in many ways a power fantasy, and sometimes your players just really do wish that capitalism had a face that you could punch to death. So what kind of ending do you want kind of factors into that a lot, I think.
Yeah, just one final thought on that, more like static answer. I love a flash forward at the end of a campaign. I
Yes.
love jumping ahead in time. So maybe like
Those are good.
they didn't get to dismantle capitalism because that is a generations long process. But you can flash forward to a next generation or 2 generations down the line and describe what the world looks like and how much better it is because they punched capitalism in the face. Yeah.
Good call.
I'm going to do in the back. Yes,
Yes.
you, sir.
You.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, when the players are all on board with you helping you establish facts and rumors and stuff, that's good. How do I sort it out if the players start exposing, like, we're in the middle of the campaign and the players bring to light to each other and to me, oh, we want completely different things or completely different ways this would go. Things they maybe held back during session 0, things they maybe didn't say.
So the question was, if you're using like facts and rumors, how do you stop the players? How do you stop them from being at odds with what various players want from the game and the direction of the game?
So there's 2 pieces to this, I think. The first is there's 2 ways to run for this. First is my impulse as kind of an asshole person, which is, I'm sorry, if you didn't tell me at the beginning, you don't get it now. That's my impulse, is to be like, no, sorry, you kind of had your shot, bud. That's not a great impulse. That's not an impulse that leads to great world building. My question would be then, talk to your players. Ask them, okay, these can be out of character conversations. This is the place to have those good in between session, out of character conversations. What are you looking for now? What were you finding not satisfying, not narratively satisfying about the things we settled before? And maybe it's something very simple where it's like, we've got these sick ass angels on the volcano island and we never go there. We want the sick-ass angels here now. And that's something you'd like, okay, I can work with that. That's something that you can work with within the facts and rumors you have developed already. If they want something totally new, at a certain point you have to ask, do you just want to start a new game? And sometimes the answer is going to be, yeah, this one has kind of petered out, and it's time to put that one in the desk drawer and mine it for great ideas later. The ideas that excite you as a GM, keep those.
But that's the beauty of it. There's always a next game.
Yeah, exactly.
And this does happen because like I've run games where as the world turns and things change in the socio-political realm, it becomes too real and it's not a fun recreational activity anymore because it echoes too many things that people are concerned about. So at that point, it's like, hey, why don't we just pack this one up? Like you said, use the ideas and then move on to something a little more fun, right? Because it was fun 6 months ago or 3 years ago, but whatever.
I will also
Not anymore.
just quickly add that Facts and Rumors gives you a toolbox. Somebody's fact could be that there are like 7 immortal warriors scattered across the world whose souls are bonded to their weapons, right?
Dope.
Maybe they come up at some point in the campaign. Maybe not. It depends. They're out there somewhere. You created them. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You had a question.
How do you get across like cultural values and conventions to your players without just
Clothing. Clothing.
Yeah.
So I am, if you haven't seen me sitting up there with a spinning wheel in the lounge, I am a fiber arts nerd. Clothing is a perfect way to get across cultural concepts immediately. What are the colors? Do they have rich dye? Do they have intricate patterns? Are they very simple? Are they modest? What does their culture even think modesty is anyway? I'm thinking here about an ancillary justice where full-on nudity, A-OK, but you better wear your gloves. You gotta wear your gloves in the Ratch Empire. You gotta do it. This stuff is fascinating. So you can do a lot with just clothing and describing the appearance of your characters. You can also use this as a way of describing different cultures throughout your world without falling back on descriptions of race, which can sometimes be a sort of a generational issue in RPGs. Is just, again, what clothes are they wearing? I have hours of lecture about the use of fabric in settings, and I will stop talking about it now.
I'm gonna say something. I would say also, like, don't be afraid to use real world analogs, especially as a way to check yourself. If you are coming up with a culture, if you're designing the culture of your setting, it's great shorthand to be able to say, like, okay, guys, we're sitting down to play this campaign. The world is inspired by, like, ancient Ireland, that kind of thing. Like, that tells people a lot in just that sentence. But if you sit down to, like, describe the aesthetics of your world and put together all of your sources, and you're like, I think we've got kind of like an Egypt vibe going on here. And then you pause and you think, am I the right person to run a game with an Egypt vibe? And you look down at yourself and you say, probably not. Then, like, that's a good opportunity to pivot and, like, find places where your world can be separate from your real world analog.
I was going to say, fine, thank you. They only gave us 3 microphones. In terms of also talking about just telling them, like you said, it depends a little bit also on context. Like, are we talking about like a tabletop session? Are we talking about LARP? Because, so in like tabletop, because of the format where there is a game master who is verbally describing a lot of things, the rules of show don't tell are a little more complicated because show is kind of inherently tell. So you're a little bit boxed in by the context that you are working in. In another context like LARP, what you might be able to do is to have your casted NPCs try to do some of that business, that costuming, to sort of demonstrative background roleplay to get that across without having to say, you see the villagers engage in some sort of strange ritual over their food.
Dabbing it up.
If someone does have a good workaround for that in a tabletop setting, I personally would love to hear it. I mean that. I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean, I would like to know. Please tell me.
They're about to kick us out.
No. Do we have
Yeah, one more question.
One more question.
Okay.
Yes, you, sir.
Yeah, so we just did like an exercise together where we kind of like put a scaffolding around the world, but then this last question motivated that off the dome, you guys have some ability to very quickly like create more than what we did together. And my question is like, how do you balance doing some of that upfront work of like, this idea of, oh, this is how a culture works, right? And how much of that do you do like ahead of time for the players? Because your players are just gonna walk into a city or a culture or whatever. It's like, how much should you be ahead?
I would say don't run a game unless you are super excited and you can't stop thinking about it. That's how I plan all of my campaigns. It's like I'll get an idea and I won't be able to stop thinking about it, and I will start planning out elements of the world because I can't stop thinking about it. And then eventually I'm like, all right, I'm gonna run this. So I would say just really like, I would really just say like follow your bliss. You know, if I could just summarize this panel into one sentence.
Follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss.
Heck yeah.
Follow your bliss. Follow your player's bliss.
All right. I think. Oh, go ahead.
I would say this is also where what Brendan said in the very first bit is really important. Read everything. Read history, read science, read fiction, read nonfiction. Read your genre obsessively. Read other genres obsessively. Everyone should be reading all the time. Books on tape are fine. Just pull in information from anywhere, because that's going to give you the flexibility for someone to say like, oh, well, how do you describe culture without just saying this culture does X, Y, and Z, and lets you be like, oh, clothes. You follow your bliss and you read obsessively.
Yeah, that'll give you the Legos that you could have at your disposal to just sort of assemble on the fly into something.
Can I throw in one last thing there? In the back of the DMG and a bunch of other TTRPG books, there tend to be charts for like city or world building as well, right? So if you're at a point where you are just looking for ideas, you can just go to those charts and just start rolling dice and see what you come up with. Now, what you come up with may be complete chaos, right? And you're like, no, that doesn't fit. But heck, you can just read through those and say, okay, these are neat ideas. Maybe I can just kind of slap this together into something that really works for my world, that just gives you a springboard. And then from there, you start looking at other references to see how you want to enhance it.
Yeah.
So.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. However, we will be hanging out outside if people do have any more questions. We have been live from the apocalypse. You can catch us on Twitch and on all of the social media things for as long as they exist in whatever forms they exist.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. It's been great.